Dr. George Hanshaw and Dr. Craig Brewer here, who are going to share a little bit about AI feedback and grading. They are going to dive into how AI feedback is shaping student writing and confidence. Dr. Brewer and Dr. Hanshaw will share some early research findings and what they're learning from students. So as you listen, think about how AI and human feedback can work together. All right, the floor is yours, and just take it away.
Thank you so much, Kenna.
Thank
Craig?
you so much, Kenna.
Here we go.
Yes, so welcome. We're so glad to have the opportunity to be with you today. Thank you for joining us. I want to just provide a little bit of anecdotal feedback and context for the study, and then I'm going to turn it over to George to walk us through the results. So this is basically, it's a study we did for our Intro to Psychology course. And we teach that every 8 weeks. And usually we have 2 to 3 sections. And so I taught one of those sections and I used AI generated feedback. And then the other 2 courses did not have that in place. And so those were our control groups, if you will. And what George is going to share with you is the quantitative feedback that we have from the end of course surveys. And we also did a survey at the end as well. But our research question was, does AI-assisted feedback improve students' perceptions of clarity and support compared to instructor-only feedback? That was really our focus. We focused on 2 main papers for this study. Our hypothesis going in was that students receiving AI-assisted feedback will report higher clarity and support scores and greater satisfaction with feedback quality. And so we use Nectar. That's the organization that we partnered with to do this initiative. And what I did as the instructor is I ran every paper through the system to get comments and also to have it score with the rubrics. So here's 3 of my key learnings I just want to share with you. Number 1 is that AI generated feedback provided far more positive statements than I typically would do. You know, we oftentimes hear that for every 1 criticism, you need 10 positive comments to encourage someone. Well, what I found was through using AI generative feedback, it provided multiple positive feedbacks all the way throughout the document. And so students got a lot more encouragement than they typically would. And it helped to balance my critical feedback. I tend to be critical and say, these are areas to improve. So it was a really nice balance. The second area I want to talk about as a key learning is that the AI generated feedback addressed areas that I missed. So there's a lot of things I noticed that I was missing in terms of writing style, grammar, sentence structure, the logic of an argument, things that I just would miss that the AI generated feedback caught and provided those comments. So students are getting more comprehensive feedback through this. And then the third key learning was that I found that I've got a bias towards students who wrote well in APA format. And the reason I found that out was I was looking at the AI generated grading and noticing that I would tend to grade those students a little bit lower on the critical thinking aspects, whereas AI didn't have that same bias that I had around APA writing. So I found that was kind of interesting. But what that really gets at is having generative AI grading with the rubric helped me to rethink and really do more objective grading. So some anecdotal feedback from students. Several students reached out to me personally to express gratitude for the amount of feedback that they got on their papers. They say, I've never gotten this much feedback on my paper. Thank you so much. And so that was different. And then I also felt like I was doing a better job with this tool because I'm providing more comprehensive feedback to students. And lastly, just appreciated not just scoring the rubric myself, but having AI generated tool to look at that. And again, just help me in my objectivity in terms of grading. So those were some of my key findings and anecdotal feedback. I want to turn it over to George now to talk us through what the data says.
Oh, yes. The data was fun. So in the chat, if you have a second, what do you think the data told us about AI feedback? Did the students like it, hate it, didn't care? Just kind of put it in there and let me hear what you thought about it, because it's kind of interesting what happened. So what is the goal of feedback? That's the question also. So as you're in the chat, what's our goal of giving feedback to students? And for our perspective, and Craig ran this and did just a fantastic job. The goal was to increase student outcomes and make them better at writing, basically, make them more of a professional in the field. Angela says, don't think they liked it, didn't care or notice so much. I think they liked it. Those are all great. And if we go to the next slide, we're going to get a little bit more, because we have to make a paradigm shift, right? We have to go from technology to teammate. We heard Jay talk about that, our president talk about that in the original keynote. And Craig, did you see yourself making that kind of shift as you were using this AI and your self-feedback, that hybrid approach?
Absolutely. It's kind of fascinating to look at the research and think of students in the future kind of co-collaborating with AI. And I feel like I have been co-collaborating with AI, and it's really been a teammate to support me to do better work.
Right. That's reality. It helps everybody when we use it ethically and judiciously. Yeah. It's helpful. Confidence. Thank you, Amy. And if we go to the next one, here's the results. So we kind of found kind of a high level results is we saw students gain efficacy. They had stronger efficacy. They had a greater focus on career and skills, and they had better practical reflective benefits. And we know this because we see in this bar chart in slide 5 here that it gave a more consistent experience for students. So notice here, when Craig was teaching all these courses, much smaller on our bar chart were the scores, and much greater spread out they were when others. So in other words, it was the experience was much more consistent. And when students have a consistent experience, they tend to do better overall, right? Whether it's in higher education, training, wherever it is, we're looking to create that experience. And it's also less emotional. We notice in the others with no AI, their responses in the end of course survey are swing from negative to positive. Whereas when in Craig with the hybrid AI approach to feedback, it centered people more. So they were less emotional about the feedback. They were more introspective and reflective about it, which was very cool. So we found in the next slide, which was kind of neat, was their growth as a writer went up, confidence in writing went up, feedback seen as insightful went up, and I misplaced all of the percentages. So I'll take that away for next time. Their motivation to revise was better. So imagine a student who wanted to revise something, right? Absolutely amazing. And these came from the improvement from paper 1 to paper 2. So Craig, I'm going to kind of throw it back to you for just a sec. Yes. Is this what you saw, anecdotally, what you saw as the person doing this, as the faculty?
Absolutely. And so one of the things, these two papers are part 1 and part 2. So part 2 builds on part 1, meaning that they're really interconnected. And so the feedback on part 1 was really aimed at helping them be better prepared for part 2. And I think I absolutely saw that. I think the motivation to revise, again, with all the positive comments that the generative AI tool helped me to provide, students were more motivated. They were more able, I think, to see that critical feedback and take that in and make the changes versus just seeing critical feedback and kind of shutting down and whatnot. I think the motivational factor, I saw that anecdotally with students and how they responded to the feedback as well.
Yeah, that was so important. So the next slide has a really interesting piece. How do we think it affected grade outcomes? So don't move the slide yet. In the chat, how many percentage points do we think it influenced the grade outcomes? So get it in there. Just pop that in the chat. Your best thought. Asha already said feedback helps them see the gap between current and desired performance. I love that. It's like a continual gap analysis when they get that good feedback. So Oh man, we don't have a drum roll, do we? So let's go to slide 7, and we're going to see what the effect on students that it actually had. Oh yes, we have a drum roll. 20% in grade improvement. So we saw students actually getting the feedback, reading the feedback, and then improving by 20%. And Craig, you already stated that's what you really saw, right? That's realistic of what happened. And some people might think, well, of course, they're using AI, right? Well, we are for the feedback, and then students are taking that feedback and making adjustments.
Yes.
So it's really interesting how well this is actually working, and we're getting those bumps. So from my perspective, and I think, Craig, from both of our perspectives, slide 8 is going to show us exactly the way we feel. So if you're not partnering with AI, you're racing towards irrelevant, right? So let's not have that race. No, that's kind of a bold statement, right? But what that actually means is when you're engaging in a ethical, judicious, and way that grows efficacy, you're actually doing the students better, right? And in psychology, what's our famous saying? Do no harm. Well, so if you're not giving them the tools that increase their outcomes, increase their expertise, are we doing them harm? I don't know. Your call. From my perspective, 100% we would. So that's why that's kind of interesting for me to see. So are we up for seeing what that feedback actually looks like really quickly? Does anybody want to see the nectar that we did? And Ken, I'll share my screen if I can do that. All right. And what's amazing about this is can you add that to the there we go. So here is the actual feedback that it gives when we're inside. Now this is from Nectar, right? So it's an enclosed space. We're not leaking any content, any FERPA information outside. This is all self-contained. This is what we use with Nectar. The bot came in and it identified the assignment as a case study. Step 2, feedback. It gave in-text feedback. So if you want, it picked out different parts within the paper and gave feedback. And I said, okay, make it say professor feedback. So that's why it said that. So it's clear to the professor reading this of what that is. And then it also filled out the rubric and gave a score. So behaviors and environment are clearly identified. So all of the feedback was specific to that student as well. So not only did it give excellent feedback throughout the paper, it also gave feedback right in the rubric and then summative feedback as well. So that's pretty impressive the way it worked through that and gave a score. And then do we just use this as a feedback? Of course not. We go through, and this is a first swipe, and we go through and look at it and see what we want to do. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment. So Craig, when students got that feedback, because you did this for, how many terms did we do this now? 2 or 3?
Summer 2, fall 1, fall 2, spring 1, and now spring 2. So we're going on, this is our 5th term of piloting this study.
We have we have a ton of data, and it just we keep getting data that supports what we've already got. And so as that feedback hit and you were able to use that, how much did you adjust the feedback that you gave when you finally publish it to students?
That's a great question. So one of the things I'll share is that I would give Nectar the AI generated feedback. I would help it to tailor the responses as well. So part of it was looking at the original feedback and then not only editing it. So I would edit it where I needed to edit it, but if I knew I needed to make some edits, sometimes I would just go back and just say, hey, for the future, for example, so one example would be, in some cases, it had 4 sentences after every 4 sentences that the student had written, and it just felt like it was a little bit too much. And so I said, can we tailor that down to just do 2 sentences? And so basically I was partnering with Nectar on the feedback, and I got to a point where it gave, 2 kind of just real clear sentences about feedback, and it was happening about every paragraph. So I felt like that was kind of the sweet spot as I was working through it. And some things I would tweak a little bit. So for example, it might have, made a comment that didn't sound as encouraging as I would like to be. And so I would tweak or edit that comment. But over time, the more I've worked and provided feedback to the generative AI assistant, the less editing I have to do. Now I feel like in this term when I'm doing it, most of the time the feedback is really great. I might do a few tweaks here and there. The summative feedback is also awesome. So at the end of it, to have that summative feedback with those 4 or 5 sentences, it does an excellent job of really summarizing the students' work, encouraging them. And that's for me as an instructor, that's great because I don't have to start that myself. I have a starting point where that's already summarized the work, and now I'm editing it. I'm tweaking it a little bit here and there, but it saves me a lot of time because it's already kind of gone through the process. And so now, rather than starting from scratch when I'm grading, I'm tweaking, I'm editing, and I'm considering, and I'm learning as well. Like I said, I've got certain biases as a grader, and so I'm becoming more aware of those as I look at how it graded the rubric versus how I might grade that.
Oh, that's kind of brilliant. And I noticed using it as well that when it gives me feedback, it really catches things. And that's just, I find absolutely amazing it catches the stuff that I wouldn't normally see, like what you said in the beginning. And then when it does that, I say, oh, that makes me better. It makes me look more critically at what I'm doing, so it has me do like a self QA check, if you will. So that's kind of amazing the way it does that. So with us here now, we're almost at the 20-minute mark. Shall we take some questions? Anybody have any good questions that they'd like to ask? And this is Craig, myself, and Shannon Hunt created This How AI, a practical approach to teaching with artificial intelligence. Feel free to check this out, download it. Hopefully it's got some very practical stuff that you can use, because it is different teaching with AI and that partnership that's happening. And it's only going to become more and more different. Craig, I got a question for you, Craig. Since you've been doing this for 6 terms now, where do you see, in all of your courses, we have AI integrated into every single course. So not just the feedback, there's AI course assistants. You have Shannon's talking about Miguel coming up, right? So with all of those AI assistants in the course, where do you see it going?
So I think, so there's a part of it too, George, where we want to prepare our students for career success. And so it's not just us using the tools. Right now I'm sharing about how I'm an instructor using the tools, but part of what we've been doing in our course design process is encouraging students to use AI tools and to get familiar with those tools, because they're going to need to be able to use those tools to be successful. And that's one of the things that LAPU prides itself on. We say, we want to prepare students for career success. So what we've done is we've integrated a lot of tools into our courses for students to begin to use and experiment with generative AI on the assignments is a starting point. And so they're learning it. And I think for me personally, by doing the grading assistant, I'm learning it. And so we're both learning together as we go through the process. And again, it's a struggle, because I think many educators fear that students are just going to rely too heavily on AI. and not do the work. And so what we're trying to do is integrate AI into the actual assignment, saying, we know you're going to use AI. We want to help you to use it ethically and know how to use it in the right way. And so I feel like we've been really kind of cutting edge, George. A lot of the faculty that I've been talking to and working with have not had the opportunity to pilot and experiment with some of these tools at other institutions. So just feel blessed that we've had the opportunity to do some of this and to share our learning as a result of that.
That's amazing. So Alyssa has a question for us. What would you say to an instructor who's not sure about using AI for grading? Ooh.
I would essentially, the main point I would probably talk about is providing more comprehensive feedback to students. So if we want students to improve and we want to give them critical feedback to help them improve, if we have a tool that can help us to give more comprehensive feedback and do a better job of doing that, why would we not use it? And I think ethically, it makes me better as a professor to be using the tool. And so I think part of the concern from some instructors might be, I still want to do the grading. And I want to be clear, the AI is not doing the grading. It's going through, it's giving comments, it's giving a score on the rubric, but that's not the final score. I go through that myself. I read through those comments, I read through the submission, I read through. So it's not replicating the instructor. It's a step in the process that I think helps me as the instructor to have more feedback to review, to provide to the student, and then also to have a second perspective on the grading in terms of the rubric and help me see things a little bit more objectively than I otherwise might. I would argue that AI grading, this is where things are headed because, again, it's so beneficial for students. And what we're seeing in a lot of learning management systems now is they're integrating AI tools into that. So in the future, 5 years from now, what I anticipate is as an instructor, when you pull up a student paper, you'll already have that AI generated feedback there. You'll have the AI generated feedback in the rubric. That is where things are headed. And so the issue is timing too. And again, for me, I feel like I want to make sure I'm doing my students a service and coaching them and preparing them for career success. So there's some responsibility and onus ethically on myself to get up to speed, to begin using the tool. So I would just encourage that instructor to begin experimenting with it and not to think that this isn't an ethical thing where you're giving away your responsibility to AI. Instead, you're co-creating and partnering with AI to really provide a better educational experience for the student.
That's amazing.
Looks like we have a couple other questions here too. One was from Angela a little bit earlier. Do you find that any students had any objections to having their writing fed into an AI tool, or objections on training the model, or authorship, or environmental objections?
So the great question. Going into this, I thought I might get some concerns. So let me give you a little context. For in the beginning of the class, week 1, in my announcement, I talk about the fact that AI generated tool will be used for grading to provide feedback. And then also at the end of every summary statement, there's a statement that says that an AI generated tool has been used to provide feedback. It ensures them that it's been done, that their material has been kept confidential. And so I've got a paragraph at the end of every submission in addition to the discussions. So students were fully aware that the tool was being used. I have not had one student come to me or express any concerns around the tool, which was quite surprising. I thought I would. I thought students might say, hey, I'm going to this private university, and now instead of you grading as the instructor, the AI is grading. And so I anticipated having student concerns about that. But interestingly enough, nothing. No concerns at all from any students around that. And I think in part the paragraph below it did articulate pretty well, just to reassure them that their information was kept confidential.
That's really important because we're not trying to take the faculty member out of the loop. We're giving them a tool to help them give even better feedback. So I think with the way it's been helping students, it's been received very positively, which is kind of cool.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. We have another question from Matthew. It was mentioned that it helped decrease some of your bias as a professor, but how have you reduced bias within the AI grading tool?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we use this thing where we call ground truth, and we use examples and samples. So we train the assistant, so it's not just going out and getting general information; it's getting very specific information about the assignment, the rubric, everything else is there. So it's being trained to focus on the content that we wanted to focus on. So we went out and gave it that focus with the training and then tested it as well to make sure it didn't just come back with something kind of crazy. And then we also put the professor there as the ultimate responsibility. So if it did, let's say it completely broke and just gave some random stuff out there, it would never get to the student anyway. So that's how. So we put parameters and guardrails on the actual assistant itself, and then we didn't, just because we gave it some of the duties and tasks in the feedback doesn't mean we gave it responsibility for the feedback. So that's how we reduce bias with the AI grading tool itself.
That's awesome. It looks like we have 3 more questions here. One from Cindy. Have you ever encouraged multi-step editing using AI with students? For example, first round review for global issues like sticking to the thesis and overall validity of argument, second round for grammar and punctuation. And is this manageable as an approach to the overall timeline available in your courses?
I haven't necessarily used a multi-step process because it's really been one process. But the generative AI tool is picking up all of those things. And as George has shared, we've trained that tool as well in terms of what we want it to look for. So all 3 of those different areas can be addressed in the first paper in terms of with generative AI and the instructor together, so that we're not necessarily needing to do iterative feedback for all 3 of those, whereas we can really look at all that together, give that feedback, and then respond and prepare the student for the next submission.
Great.
Absolutely.
Looks like we have another question from Kendall. Dr. Hanshaw, I've never used AI for any assignment. I fear losing my critical thinking skills and autonomy. What AI tools do you build into assignments at LAPU that you would recommend broadly?
I am so glad to hear that you're worried about losing your critical thinking skills, because you can. If you use AI, if you just offload the work into AI, it is shown that you can lose critical thinking skills. But when you use it in a Socratic way, so in other words, as a discussion back and forth to help you learn and grow, it has the opposite effect. It helps you learn quicker. So if we download our brain and let the AI assistant do the work, that's no good. That doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help you after you get out of your degree program. It doesn't help with anything that you're doing. So that's a fantastic question. And we use Nectar, where we're able to train and create its personality, if you will. So it's Socratic. So it's always back and forth. Hey, well, literally doesn't give you the answer. It engages you in conversation, and that forces you to then reach back and make these connections with the content, with your previous experience. So it helps you be able to recall this information quicker. And when you can recall quicker, guess what? You've used less energy in that motion there to recall the information. You can now use it in critical ways to solve, in creative and critical ways to solve really complex problems. So it's important that we use it that way, and that's why we say in an ethical way. So Nectar is a fantastic tool that we use at LAPU, and you could use any GPT out there if you simply put in the prompts correctly, so it's not just an answer machine. Because you don't want it as an answer machine. That's when there's issues.
Great response. Thank you. Looks like we have one more question. Of course, I think teaching with AI is beneficial. However, as a professor, are there any tasks or roles that you believe only humans can uniquely perform?
You want to hit that, Craig? You want me to do that one?
Why don't you start with that, George?
Well, I always say in courses that I teach, the number one thing, our number one job as a professor, as an instructional designer, as anybody, is building relationships, right? So getting to know people, building those relationships, because business and everything else basically runs on relationships, no matter what we say. So as a faculty member, doing the higher order thinking and that higher order connecting with students is not going to be replaced, because the students crave that, right? So that piece is never going away. And when we use like this grading assistant, it frees up our time to make better connections with our students and, hey, this has been my experience, and really forge those bonds that are going to help that student succeed, not just in school, but after they graduate in their career in life. So that's what I see never even getting touched.
Yeah, I echo your comment, George. I think the personal relationship piece is critical. Oftentimes students connect with me and are looking for a letter of recommendation at some point, and I tell them I'm a lifelong resource for them. So having those conversations, connecting with students, the interpersonal connection still remains and is still critical, but the AI provides a lot of tools to help and assist in that, especially with things that are written or even speeches or presentations. Or, for example, if I'm going to call a student and they've expressed some concerns, I can use generative AI to say, I'm calling a student with these concerns. Give me some context about what things I should say. Or so again, it's almost like brainstorming for me now. Even doing projects around the house now, I'm brainstorming with ChatGPT oftentimes to say, hey, help me kind of think this through. And what I found is, so instead of just thinking in my own mind, now I'm thinking broader, I'm getting more perspective, and it's helping me to see things from a broader perspective. So I don't think that the human interpersonal piece is going to go away, obviously. I just see this as a tool that really can help us as faculty to hone in on those skills and get better